So we're going to start out here. We're going to be looking at a few scriptures from the book of Acts. So let us get started. Before the term Christianity became widespread, the earliest followers of Messiah were known as to follow the way. In the book of Acts, these faithful followers are frequently called followers of the way. So if we go to Acts chapter 9, verse 2, and the scriptures I'll be reading tonight will be coming out of the scriptures itself for the most part. So Acts 9, verse 2, asked from him letters to the congregations of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, to bring them bound to Jerusalem. So this is Paul. Before he had his transformation, he was going to go after the men and women who followed the way. If we go down, drop down to Acts chapter 19, verse 9. But when some were hardened and did not believe, speaking evil of the way before the crowd, he withdrew from them and separated the taught ones, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. Acts 19, chapter 19, verse 23. And about that time there came to be a great commotion about the way. Acts chapter 24, verse 14. And this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, so I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all that was been written in the Torah and in the prophets. Last but not least, Acts chapter 24, verse 22. And having heard this, having known more exactly about the way, Felix put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I shall decide your case. These believers, those followers of the way, upheld the Torah and observed the appointed times of the Father, and followed the teachings of Messiah as the promised Redeemer within Israel's covenant. However, as time passed, theological shifts emerged, particularly through Roman influence and figures like Ignatius of Antioch. How many have heard of that person? Ignatius of Antioch, who sought to separate the faith from its Hebrew roots. This transition led to the development of what is now known as Christianity, a system that diverged from the Torah-centered faith of the first century Nazarene. This teaching I'm going to do tonight explores the differences between the way and Christianity, tracing the historical changes that reshaped the beliefs and practices of Messiah's followers by examining early writings, scriptural evidence, and doctrinal shifts. Antioch was an ancient city. It no longer exists except as ruins. There is a city there now that starts with an A, but I can't remember the name. And it sits right on the border between Turkey and Syria. Antioch at the time back then was a very large city. It rivaled Rome in population. But there is a warning from Paul about this in Acts chapter 20, verses 28 through 30. And another warning from a prophet back when? Ezekiel. In Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Therefore, take heed to yourselves and to all the flock, among which the set-apart Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the assembly of Elohim, which he has purchased with his own blood. Verse 29. For I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves shall come in among you, not sparing the flock. Verse 30. Also from among yourselves men shall arise, speaking distorted teachings, to draw away the taught ones after themselves. This is Paul's warning to the elders of Ephesus, cautioning them that false teachers, whom he describes as wolves, will infiltrate the assembly, leading people away from the truth. He even emphasizes that some of these deceivers will arise from within the assembly itself. Furthermore, Christianity is the largest religion in the world, with approximately 2.4 billion adherents, which is about 31% of the global population. It was widespread across various regions. Here is a biblical definition of Christianity from Ezekiel chapter 22, verses 25 through 27. Starting at verse 25. There is a conspiracy of her prophets in her midst, like a roaring lion tearing the prey. They have devoured life. They have taken wealth and precious matters. They have made many widows in her midst. Verse 26. Her priests have done violence to my teaching, and they profane my set-apart matters. They have not distinguished between the set-apart and profane, nor have they made known the difference between the unclean and the clean, and they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned in their midst. Verse 27. Her leaders in her midst are like wolves tearing the prey, to shed blood, to destroy lives, and to get greedy gain. Ezekiel rebukes the false prophets, priests, and rulers for distorting the Father's truth, just as Paul warns that false teachers would arise even from among the assembly to mislead believers. So how did this all come about? Is there a point in history where we can see this infiltration of wolves? Let's go back to 70 A.D. and begin the story there. Here the year is 70 A.D., marking the destruction of the temple and a significant turning point for the Nazarene. In the decades that followed, little is known about their movements until suddenly Ignatius of Antioch emerges. His very name signals a shift in leadership, hinting at a changing of the guard, identified with the city of Antioch, which at that time was in Syria. Ignatius of Antioch was an early 2nd century figure who is traditionally considered a bishop of Antioch and an important voice in shaping early Christianity. He is best known for his 7 surviving letters written while being transported to Rome for execution. The 7 original epistles of Ignatius: the epistle to the Ephesians, the epistle to the Magnesians, to the Trallians, to the Romans, to the Philadelphians, to the Smyrnaeans, and an epistle to Polycarp, a bishop from Smyrna. These letters provide insight into the theological and ecclesiastical shifts occurring during this time. Some key points about Ignatius' timeline and background. Tradition holds that Ignatius was born around 50 A.D. and martyred around 108 A.D. He was reportedly a disciple of John and was associated with Polycarp, another early church leader. His writings emphasized church hierarchy, urging believers to follow the bishop as they would follow the Messiah. He was one of the first to use the term Catholic Church in reference to a universal body of believers. Ignatius promoted a structure where bishops held centralized authority and departure from earlier decentralized Torah-observant assemblies. He opposed Torah observance, dismissed it as obsolete, and promoted Sunday worship over the Sabbath. His death is said to have taken place in Rome, where he was allegedly thrown to wild beasts in the Colosseum. His martyrdom narrative played a role in solidifying his influence. His writings were later used to justify hierarchical church structures and the separation of believers from Torah observance, aligning with the Romanization of faith. His legacy remains debated. Some see him as a defender of faith, while others view him as instrumental in distancing believers from Nazarene identity and Torah-based teachings. Some sources claim John was the bishop of Antioch, and that Ignatius, as his disciple, later succeeded him. This would seemingly connect him to Polycarp, another supposed student of John. However, closer examination reveals discrepancies. There is no evidence that Ignatius was familiar with the Gospel of Mark. Additionally, his connection to Luke is uncertain, and his use of John's writings is highly doubtful. An odd omission from someone allegedly taught by him. What does seem evident is that Ignatius was acquainted with Matthew's Gospel, which is noteworthy, as it was originally written in Hebrew in favor by the Nazarene. Yet rather than upholding its teachings, Ignatius championed Paul as the singular voice of their faith. That's where all that started. Instead of interpreting Paul's letters through the lens of the Torah, they reversed the process, making Paul the ultimate interpreter of script. Ignatius' historical present hinges almost entirely on a supposed martyrdom. He surfaces briefly while being transported to Rome under guard, then vanishes following his execution. Interestingly, his captors altered their route, bypassing coastal supporters and instead passing through Philadelphia, Sardis, and Smyrna. During this journey, Ignatius authored the 7 letters as mentioned earlier. And I'm going to read some excerpts from his letters. His impending execution was not a mere consequence, but a spectacle. His letters emphasize and organize a hierarchical structure and portray himself as a divinely appointed leader. Consider his words from his letter or epistle to the Smyrnaeans, reading from chapter 18. Now, I do have a hyperlink in my presentation where you can go and look at all the translations from Greek to English by these various scholars that looked at his letters. Some say, hey, maybe somebody else wrote these letters and not him, but let's read on. So we're going to look at chapter 8 from that particular letter. And it starts out at verse 1. But shun divisions, as the beginning of evils. Do ye all follow your bishop as Jesus? Okay, I'm going to use vulgar names here. As Jesus Christ followed the Father, and the presbytery, the church elders, as the apostles, and to the deacons pay respect as to God's commandment. Let no man do aught of things pertaining to the church apart from the bishop. Let that be held a valid Eucharist, which is under the bishop, or one to whom he shall have committed it. Verse 2 of that letter. Wheresoever the bishop shall appear, there let the people be, even as where Jesus may be. There is the universal church. It is not lawful apart from the bishop, either to baptize or to hold a love fest or a love feast. But whatsoever he shall approve, this is well-pleasing also to God, that everything which ye do may be sure and valid. What he's saying here, it would only be valid if I'm present. Here Ignatius introduces a term universal, which can also mean in some respects Catholic. While respect for spiritual guidance is valuable, Ignatius pushes further, centralizing authority and removing it from the Torah, the prophets, and even the Messiah himself. He asserts that nothing is valid without the bishop's sanction. In Philadelphians chapter 8, verse 2, he reinforces this stance. But as for me, my charter is Jesus Christ, the unalterable, never to be broken charter or archive is his cross and his death and his resurrection and faith through him, wherein I desire to be justified through your prayers. He's asking the people who follow him to justify him through their prayers. They're not praying to Yahweh. They're not praying through the Messiah. Ignatius dismisses the Torah and the prophets as alterable archives, aligning with the Roman imposed Jewish tax, which provided a motive for distancing from Torah observance. His universal church promoted a version of Messiah that did not align with the Hebrew Mashiach. In Magnesians chapter 8, verse 1, he escalates further. Be not seduced by strange doctrines, nor by antiquated fables, which are profitless. For if even unto this day we live after the manner of Judaism, we avow that we have not received grace. By labeling the Torah as strange doctrines and worthless, Ignatius rewrites history. Many within Christianity have adopted this framework, disregarding the Torah's role in faith. Ignatius continues in Magnesians chapter 9, verse 1. If then those who had walked in ancient practices attained unto newness of hope, no longer observing Sabbaths, but fashioning their lives after the Lord's day. His disdain for the Sabbath is evident. Ignatius' mission was not simply to reform, it was to replace the Torah with a system tailored to Roman interests. Magnesians chapter 10, verses 2 through 3, clarifies his objective. For this cause, seeing that we are become his disciples, let us learn to live as beseemeth Christianity. For whoso is called by another name besides this is not of God. It is monstrous to talk of Jesus Christ and to practice Judaism. Let me read that passage again, and let it sink in so there is no shadow of a doubt that people have been deceived into believing they are Christians. Therefore, having become his disciples, let us learn to live in accordance with Christianity, For whoever is called by any other name than this one does not belong to God. It is utterly absurd to profess Jesus Christ and to practice Judaism. There are two powerful scriptures that we should consider. Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I will reject you from being priest for me, because you have forgotten the law of Torah of your Elohim. I also forget your children. Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 19. O Yahweh, my strength and my stronghold and my refuge, in the day of distress, the nations shall come to you from the ends of the earth and say, Our fathers have inherited only falsehood, futility, and there is no value in them. Ignatius' letters serve as a disinformation campaign, shifting focus from Torah obedience to a bishop-centric Romanized faith. Ignatius was not merely advocating for unity, he was orchestrating a takeover by positioning himself as the ultimate authority. He sought to render the way of the Nazarene obsolete. His martyrdom may or may not have been real, but his legacy is undeniable, stirring many away from Yahweh's righteous instructions. Ignatius may have been first to coin the term Catholic, but the term Christian existed even before him, making a brief yet significant appearance in Scriptures. As we read from Acts chapter 11, verse 26, I'm going to read from 3 different Bibles. From the Scriptures first. And having found him, he brought him to Antioch. And it came to be that for an entire year they came together in the assembly and taught large numbers. And the taught ones were called Messianists, first in Antioch, Messianists, Messianists. I'm going to read from the King James. And when he had found him, he brought him unto Antioch. And it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the church and taught much people. And the disciples were called Christians, first in Antioch. From the Sefer. And when he had found him, he brought him unto Antioch. And it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the called out assembly, and taught much people. And the Talmudim, the taught ones, were called Mashiachim, first in Antioch. Mashiachim. Hebrew, Mashiachim. Mashiachim. It should come as no surprise that the first believers were birthed in the very city Ignatius called home, Antioch. But we are no longer part of this system that has been devised by man and manipulated by Hasatan himself. We are no longer bound by the falsehoods of a corrupted faith. We are walking in the true way of the Messiah, the path that leads us back to the roots of our Hebrew heritage, the true way of the branch of Israel. The Messiah, Yahusha, declared, Whoever finds me will find life. The time has come to heed the call, to come out of her, my people. This system, this false Christianity, is a great delusion, the strong deception that is veiled right before your eyes, hidden in plain sight, leading millions astray. We are not Christians, per se. We are not Surim. Those who walk in the footsteps of the Messiah, those who follow the true, untainted way, not the path instructed by men who have twisted and diluted the truth for their own gain. We are not bound by the doctrines that arose from Roman institutions and twisted teachings. We are the true heirs of the faith of our ancestors, walking in the light of the one true Father, Yahweh, and in the footsteps of our Messiah, Yahushua HaMashiach. This is no small matter. The battle is not simply for our beliefs, but for our very souls. We are willing to forsake the false for the truth. Are we prepared to leave behind the comfort of tradition for the radical truth of their original way? The time to decide is now. No longer can we stand with one foot in the system of Babylon and the other in the truth of Messiah. We must make a choice. Do we remain in the clutches of the enemy's system, or do we come out boldly to embrace the full truth of the kingdom of Yahweh? Simple reasoning reveals that the Torah-observing believers in Jerusalem did not identify as Christians. The term was neither a title they created, nor one they would have accepted during their lifetime. If they used any title at all, it was the way. This is a topic worth exploring in more depth. As I read before from the various chapters and verses out of Acts. These passages highlight how early believers identified as the way rather than Christians. In Strong's Concordance, the term the way is often linked to the Greek word hodos, G3598, which means a way, road, path, or journey. Figuratively, it refers to a way of life or conduct, especially in a moral or spiritual sense, when used in the New Testament to describe the early believers. Hodos refers to the way of life that follows the teachings of Yahushua and the Torah, the law of Yahweh, indicating a distinct path or movement that is centered on faith in Yahweh and his Messiah. The term the way used in the New Testament to describe the early followers of the Messiah is deeply intertwined with the identity of the Nazarene. To fully understand this connection, it is essential to explore the significance of both terms and how they relate to the original faith of the Messiah's disciples. The way refers to the lifestyle, faith, and teachings followed by the early Torah-observant believers in Yahushua. Their understanding of the Messiah was rooted in the Torah, the law of Yahweh, which they believed Yahushua fulfilled as the promised Messiah. To them, the way was not just a set of doctrines to believe, but a way of life that centered on living in accordance with the commandments and teachings of the Hebrew Scriptures. This path emphasized adherence to the Torah, and it was distinct from the later developments of Roman Christianity. The term Nazarene, which means those who guard or watch over the Torah, describes the disciples of Yahushua who were committed to living out their faith as he did. Torah observant and focused on preserving the faith of Israel. The Nazarene were not merely believers in a new faith, they were followers of the Torah, walking in the footsteps of the Messiah and preserving the original teachings of Israel. This term is connected to the Hebrew root word natsar, which means to guard, to keep, to watch over. The Nazarene were not individuals who sought to abandon or replace the traditions of Israel. Instead, they sought to uphold them in the light of the Messiah's fulfillment of the promises made to Israel. They are sometimes referred to as the branch, a term that references the messianic line of David and highlights their connection to the promised Messiah. In John chapter 15, verse 5, Yahushua says, I am the vine, you are the Nazarene. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you could do nothing. To deny this identity is to call our Messiah a liar. He directly connected himself to the Nazarene, those who are his disciples and who walk in his way, observing the Torah and living in the light of his teachings. This foundational connection is not only central to understanding who the early followers of Yahweh were, but is also a vital part of our own identity as his disciples. What we see today is a stark contrast between the original faith of the Nazarene and the Christianity that evolved over time. This process involved the distortion and manipulation of key teachings to promote a version of Christianity that was more palatable to the masses. At the cost of obedience to Yahweh's commands, the rebellious hearts of men made it easy for such a distinction to take hold, and Ignatius, among others, played a pivotal role in perpetuating these changes. However, the real issue is not merely the distortion itself, but the fact that many have chosen to remain ignorant or uninterested in the truth. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12 states, "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of Yahweh and the faith of Messiah Yahusha." The Nazarene are those who faithfully guard and walk in the Torah, holding on to the faith of Yahusha and his teachings just as it was in the beginning. The early followers of Yahusha, the Nazarene, were Torah-observant believers who walked in the original way of Messiah. They were not Christians in the modern sense, but rather they were preservers of the authentic faith of Israel, faithfully following commandments of Yahweh and living as Messiah Yahusha did. Over time, however, the influence of figures like Ignatius led to the development of a Christianity that departed from these roots. Will we be like the early believers, guarding the truth and walking in the footsteps of Messiah, or will we remain deceived by the altered version of Christianity that has been passed down to us?